Good morning, everybody. Thank you guys for all joining our first webinar series of our Lattes and Learning series. Today's topic is going to be led by Shane Butcher and John Derby of our senior cybersecurity team here at OGO, and it'll be on social engineering, mitigating and preventing attacks at your credit union. This is the start of our series that we have up here on the screen, our Latte Learnings. The next one will be on December 4th, and it will be on current events sort of within the industry. Kirk Drake will be leading that one, and this web series will be something that will be rotating through a variety of different topics and things that are happening within the industry. So the format today will be that we're going to go ahead and do a 15-minute presentation led by Shane Butcher, and then we will go ahead and leave 15 minutes for questions. And when it comes time to do that, you can go ahead and in the chat just put in any questions you have, and we'll monitor that and then make sure that Shane can answer all of those for you. So when you're ready, Shane, please go ahead and take it away.
All right. Good morning, everybody. Glad all of you could join this morning for this first session of our Lattes and Learning. I'm Shane Butcher, one of our senior solutions and security architects with our CISO as a service team, performing virtual CISO services for a number of customers. And with me this morning is Jonathan Derby, CIO.
Yep. Hello, everyone. I oversee the security practice here at Ongoing Operations, and I'll definitely be participating in the presentation and the follow-up questions, but I'll let Shane take it from here.
All right. And so with that, we're going to just go ahead and jump right in since we've got 15 minutes for the presentation. So first, we're going to start out with what is social engineering, and this is hopefully the only time that I'm going to give a boring definition, but I just want to frame, how we're going to talk about it, since there are a lot of definitions and a lot of ways you can look at social engineering. But we're going to focus on it being techniques used by malicious actors to manipulate people into divulging confidential or personal information, or performing acts that can lead to system compromise, fraud, or a data breach. So both technical and physical attacks is what we want to look at this morning. So again, as we look at what is social engineering, what are the names for it? What are the techniques? How are people doing it? We have phishing, which I'm sure everybody's familiar with that word, but trying to trick people into giving information either through email, false web pages, and what have you. Some of the terms that are out there these days are vishing, which is voice phishing, or phishing via phone, attackers calling up and trying to trick our end users into divulging confidential information or information that they wouldn't normally be able to get. Smishing, which is SMS, or text phishing, where they're impersonating your CEO and asking you to send gift cards or take pictures of gift cards. Then we've got whaling and spear phishing. I'm tossing both of those in the same category because they're very targeted to execs, or we're getting down to more where the attackers have done their research and are really digging in and trying to get some deeper information, or have someone do something they want. Business email compromise is a very big category, but it's one that I know NCUA has actually recently put a note out about it that we'll hit later in this. But it's either impersonation of business emails to try to trick folks into doing acts that they wouldn't normally, or in some cases compromising the business email system, and again getting folks to perpetrate those same acts so that the view is that this is a trusted person. Then we get into impersonation or pretexting. This is where attackers either remotely or in person are purporting to be somebody that they're not. A technician from a telephone company, a trusted vendor, your own IT help desk. And so all of the information they're gathering is leading them to be able to, pre-text their conversations and try to get a foothold into your organization. And then lastly, another physical one, tailgating. That's where folks are trying to, get access to your facility by talking to someone, chatting them up as they're walking through and asking them to hold the door. So, these are all ways to get into both our physical and technical facilities and purport some sort of fraud or compromise. This is one example of a social engineering phishing email that was received by one of our employees, and I show it because it's kind of bad, and it highlights, though, some of the things that we need to ensure our users are checking. But this is a spear phishing attack coming supposedly from our CEO. I think a lot of you are familiar with Kirk Drake. But what we notice is that the from name and the email address do not match Kirk Drake. And so through our testing and training, we're going to hopefully get our end users to start looking for items like this before they respond or click or engage with someone.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one thing, as we see these happen weekly, and even with the best, the best edge protection, these emails will always get through. So we'll talk later about really the emphasis on the end user training.
All right, and so, we want to talk about, how does this affect my credit union? Social engineering is, really ways that folks are getting ransomware into your environment so that they can profit. Member information disclosure through a number of different channels, either, credential harvesting or the ability to get in and access your systems. Purport fraud, get folks to wire money, redirect payments, access online member accounts, those sorts of things. And then ultimately reputation damage and damage to your business. If you are the recipient of attack that's extensive and affects your members, that's definitely going to take a toll on your business and your reputation in the industry. So this is an image source of KnowBe4, but I thought it emphasized the point very well. The attackers are going for the low-hanging fruit humans. We as people want to be helpful for the most part, and when we make those connections with, we think we make a connection with someone, we're more likely to help and want to do the right thing. And this is why 98% of attacks are relying on social engineering. It's easier to get someone to do something for you than to actually exploit most of the technical vulnerabilities that an attacker would. If you can get them to run something, you don't have to hack through multiple layers of security. So how do we mitigate and prevent attacks? This image here is courtesy of Lockheed Martin, and they came up with something called the Cyberkill chain. And what this shows is basically the anatomy of an attack and the steps that a malicious actor goes through to fully compromise your environment. And if we are able to thwart that attack at any of these steps or any of these chains, links in the chain, we can effectively stop that attack. So as we look at social engineering, we're going to focus on two of the areas of the chain. One, reconnaissance and how the attackers are getting information either publicly or from our end users, and also on the delivery of the attack. How are they able to deliver any exploits or access our systems? So as we talk today, we're going to focus on being able to break those two parts of the chain so that they can't get a foothold. So how are attackers gathering information? And one piece at a time. I know that sounds a little redundant, but or a little simple, but they may not go after one person and try all of the information. They may pose as a trusted vendor and call up and say, I'm an engineer from your core system vendor. I've lost my username. Who should I contact to get that? And they might point, being friendly, someone might point them to the right person in your core team or your help desk, and kind of escalate the information gathering one piece at a time. But if we look at methods where they can gather information passively, they can look at your website. which is the best place to get spear phishing information, because most credit unions, and rightfully so, and most businesses have their executive and leadership teams out there. But that just, through some very easy figuring out of what your email address is, they're able to get us spear phishing. LinkedIn, again, gives a similar amount of information, but even more information on who your employees might be and what their roles within the organization, so that as they're trying to contact people and get information, it just gives a little more of a foothold and a little more credibility if they know names. Job postings can actually give away a wealth of information for a potential attacker, especially around IT type postings. If you're advertising that you need a Cisco engineer with experience with Dell and Q2 and all of these applications, well, we've now just built a profile of what systems are used, and gives an attacker the ability to to either look at social engineering or even potential exploits that they might be able to attack once they effectively get in. And then lastly, employee Facebook pages. Once they determine who your employees are, if your employees have all of their information public, they're able to gather ways to befriend them, or make it know or seem like they know them, and get that connection where the employee is more likely to give information. So as we look at our training, we want to mention all of these things to our employees and how they can secure these. And then active methods of gathering information, phone calls. Like I had mentioned earlier, just being able to call up and get one piece of information and jump to the next until they can find that right person who's going to help them out. And then again, engaging on social media. Are they engaging with you on LinkedIn? Are they friending you on Facebook, and able to build that rapport so that they can then get into your organization? What are some of the methods that attackers deliver exploits? Email, we all know about with phishing. Web pages, both credential harvesting and downloading. Even going so far as to say, oh, here, I've shared a file with you in Dropbox, put your credentials in, right? And either download a malicious file or gather those. Dropping a USB in your parking lot or in your lobby. If someone grabs that and plugs it in to see, what's on it, how can they do that? Or see what's on it and push out an exploit. Or in person, trying to get past your defenses, pose as a technician, or just walk right through your front door. What can they get to? All right, so what we do. So what can we do to protect our credit unions? First, we want to cover the basics. We need our anti-malware and antivirus software. In this day and age, we want endpoint security software, which is looking, deeper and at more pattern-based events than traditional signature-based anti-malware software. We want to make sure we have solid email security that includes anti-phishing and anti-spoofing technologies, preferably. We always need our IDS and IPS so that we're examining the traffic that's flowing both in and out of our network, but across it and across security boundaries. And then policies and procedures are very important. We want to make sure our employees know how the IT staff will engage with them. Are they going to call up and say, hey, click on this link for me? Hopefully not, right? Our policies are that the IT staff, through their credentials are going to do this. But we want to make sure our employees know those processes so that when things go outside the norm, they question it and they have a clear path of how to report those differences. We want to make sure that we've got procedures for verifying identity when exchanging any sort of privileged information. So if someone calls up and says, hey, can you tell me who so-and-so is? We want that person to know to call back from the company directory and make sure that that was really the person they were talking to. And then physical security procedures. Who needs to be escorted? Who can we allow to be alone and unescorted in our secure, the secure areas of our facilities. Make sure that our employees are following all those, processes, even if they think it's a trusted person. The most important thing we can do is training. We want to ensure that security and training is part of our culture from day one. So from the first, when the employee first starts, we want security training to be there, and they understand that that is an important part of our culture. Train our employees to be skeptical, make them question everything, because that's when we get complacent, that's when the attacks get in. train them on all aspects of information security, including social engineering. Make sure that we're covering the whole gamut of physical security, social engineering, good password policy, and what our procedures are. And then we want to perform security training at least annually, preferably quarterly. When we do it quarterly, we show our employees that it is an important part of our organization. And we also want to make sure that those trainings are interactive so that they can't just hit the play button and let them run while they're doing their other job. And preferably we want to use some external software and content so that we're getting fresh training and that we're allowing the industry standards to, and as things change and new threats come out, that we're leveraging those resources to do the training. Lastly, we want to be sure that we want to be sure that we're testing. Monthly phishing testing is critical, and preferably using an outside party to administer. That way your administrators are being tested as well and don't know when they're coming, because sometimes our IT guys are the quickest to click because they're so busy. And so let's make sure that we're testing them. Remote social engineering, voice phishing tests at least annually, so we're testing our processes and procedures when folks call us. We should be doing on-site social engineering tests to make sure that our physical security procedures are tight and that folks can't wander around the secure areas of our facilities. And when you do this, be sure you're utilizing a firm with experienced testers. It makes all the difference in the world. A, they're professional. B, they're more likely to really be able to test in those scenarios where an attacker might. But when we're doing our on-site and remote social engineering tests. Some other things that we want to start looking at: multi-factor authentication. A lot of you may be using this, probably for remote connections, maybe even privileged accounts. But the NCOA, I believe it was in August, sent a risk alert recommending multi-factor authentication as a method of preventing or helping to prevent business email compromise. There are a lot of organizations out there now that are using multi-factor for all of their accounts. Initially it could be a pain and a hindrance, but once we make that part of our culture, it is a good way to help prevent credential compromise. For email, we want to implement a bunch of acronyms here: SPF, DKIM, and DMARC. All of these are technologies that help prevent spoofing of emails and attackers being able to use our domain name against us and against others. And then lastly, one that's a little farther out is micro-segmentation. When we start getting into technologies like software-defined networking, we can now start looking at the traffic going across our network so that if it's not a pattern that we would normally expect, when an attacker hits, we can start shutting it down. What can you do right now? And John's going to take this section for us.
So what can you do right now? So, the practical takeaways that could make an impact immediately, right? So first things first is reduce your vulnerabilities and attack vectors, right? So we've talked a lot about the human element, and humans are always going to be a risk, but you also have this responsibility. The less vulnerabilities you have, the less ways the less exposure that creates for your credit union. So a few basic things: patching and AV up to date. Checking your patching. When's the last time you looked at your signatures? When was the last update? That's something you could get off this call and say, hey, all of my computers and servers are patched, as well as my network equipment. Same thing, AV. It's really your responsibility to be looking at these things, and it's a great way to just lower your vulnerabilities off the bat. Review configuration of email security and anti-malware platforms. A lot of us have some very sophisticated tools, Zix, Ironport, etc. But when's the last time we actually looked at how those are configured? We need to get into a cadence of that. And I'd encourage people to review that configuration in your email security platform and see, does it make sense? Is it accomplishing the goal? The next bullet is actually a huge one that folks could do today, and that's add text to your subject line or body of external emails to identify them as originating outside. This is extremely relevant because most phishing emails are coming from outside your organization, and if someone sends you an email that looks like an internal communication and it's got a huge external sign in the subject line or at the top of the email, your end user immediately knows, hey, this came from Susie in accounting, but it's external, right? then it's not really an internal email, and it is, most likely some kind of email spoofing going on. And this is a practice we really encourage credit unions to do, and it can have a tremendous impact. And it also helps educate your end users how much kind of spoofed or external email they're actually getting that is trying to pass as internal. Ensure your training program is effective and you are testing your employees. So the question I asked everyone on this call, are all of your users actually trained, and are you keeping record of it? Earlier in this presentation, we said we want this to happen on day one. A lot of credit now say, hey, we don't really even put you on our network. We have very limited rights. You've gone through the training. As we said previously, we encourage you to use a third party. There's a lot of great software providers out there, and we're happy to make recommendations on that. And actually use those tools. So it is very common we walk into a credit union and they've actually purchased the tools. They just actually haven't implemented it, or they're not using them to the fullest of their capability. A lot of times when you buy these, the security training suites, people might just do once a year. We recommend quarterly, but you usually have access to a lot of great content and have a policy and a program that's going to roll those out. So, but the ask of everyone on the call today is you should be able to verify if all of your users have gone through your basic security training, and also look at the software you have today. Are you using the max benefit you have available to you? All right. Review your websites, LinkedIn, job listings, and other social media pages. And just look at this from a hacker's view. How much information you get about your organization, your employees, and even your members. Because also think when it does allow hackers to also collect information about maybe who your members are. But just look at holistically, how much information are you putting out there, and put on your malicious hat for a moment. Say, hey, I think if I knew these 5 things, I could have a conversation with this person and get XYZ information, which might, create a vulnerability there.
And we want to use this information to educate our employees, right? So that if they know all of this information is out there, they're going to be more skeptical when folks call.
So, exactly.
And lastly, sorry, John and Shane, we had a question come in just on that topic of, are there industry standards on what process to follow for corrective action for employees that failed phishing multiple times?
So the best thing is to have a policy and to follow it. And we have seen, and so number one, have a policy around that's clearly communicated to employees. And that's gonna be the first question,
and it should include remediation training, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's where, we want to have that program of, if our users fail, we want to train them, right? And track them. If, we've seen it go from, multiple, failures that folks start talking, more HR type action to, employees turning it around. But the key, like John said, is having that policy, but also follow up with remediation training.
Yeah. So the question that we frequently get is, can you terminate an employee for this behavior? And my answer always is, if your policy outlines a policy for repeat failures. We've seen some credit unions use that policy, but it's a policy you have to apply it to every end user. Yep. So the training, the training around that is essential. So the lowest person in your organization has to be held at the CEO at the same level. Yep. And where credit unions often run into some issues on the policy is that your executives are actually targeted the most in these campaigns, and it's usually for a lot of these attacks, you'll see it's the managing executive levels targeted the most, and might fall susceptible to a lot of these times, and that's where people struggle with the policy, because if the policy has to apply to all employees in the organization.
I think that we're at the Q&A.
Yeah.
So. Yeah, and lastly on that, obviously, any labor laws that apply to your credit union, make sure we're complying with those. But yeah, the policy is definitely the key part of that. So, right. Do we have any other questions coming in, Amy?
Yeah, guys, feel free to go ahead and type those questions in if you guys have any, and we'll go ahead and get those answered. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, and just, and there's a lot of places where you can put those policy. I know a lot of people have just basically social awareness policies now is probably as their information security. So usually it'll touch right in that, or it'll go into the HR handbook.
And be sure you're reviewing those policies at least annually. to make sure that they're current and applying to the current reality of your organization.
Got another question in here. Does OGO support MFA for Windows network authentication for its managed service customers? If so, what solution is supported?
For network authentication. So I will have to check with operations. So on the CISO side, we have a wall up where we evaluate ongoing operations as we would any other vendor of our customers. So when I say I have to check with operations, I want to make sure. But the platform that OGO currently uses is Duo for multi-factor authentication, which supports multi-factor across network devices, Windows devices, multiple web platforms. So I don't know if they've actually deployed it yet for server authentication, but it's it's been used for through LDAP and network device authentication and all of that is in multiple web platforms.
Great. Hopefully that answered your question. We've got one more that came in here. How does the on-site social engineering work, and how is it performed?
So generally what happens is when you engage with the vendor, you set up a scenario. So I've seen it where it could be from CUNA or an insurance investigator or a Verizon, if you're in Verizon's area tech, coming in and trying to get to a network closet. And a lot of times they will usually key it up with a spam or a phishing email that goes out ahead of time, right? That is not from your organization, but purports to be from like your IT director or one of those positions to the folks that are targeted to see if they actually follow your procedures. So they might come in and say, I'm so-and-so, I need access to this particular area. And do they escort them? Do they, is somebody assigned to watch them? Are they validating with the appropriate folks in your organization? They are supposed to be there. And once they get in, if they're not escorted, they will go around, wander around the facility and see, can they get to open offices? Are there papers left around? Are computers unlocked? Can they get lockpicks in your server room door and take pictures of it? So those sorts of things.
It's actually, we've seen a lot of those over the years. And one of the most interesting things is a lot of people who have the biggest challenge with these are the credit unions that are associated with potentially a government agency or a sponsor that, gives hey, we've got this perimeter. You got to go through a guards gate to get onto this government location where you have this sense of a perimeter security, but where the reality is there could be tens of thousands of people granted access to that facility any day for really any reason. And that since there's a sense of perimeter security, once you're past that perimeter, there's a much lighter sense of security, and they're going to walk into a server room or into a computer room at a branch. So that's one thing to keep in mind. I know folks that are tied to larger government agencies or large different segments where there is this security. Keep that in mind. You can never just on, even if you can't just rely on security that might go around your headquarters.
Right. And to these types of engagements is your contract defining those rules of engagement. What do you want them to do in your credit union, right? Can they take pictures and as the proof? You want to lay that out very clearly. And if you are in shared facilities, if your branches are in facilities that might be secured, be sure that the folks that are controlling those facilities know what's happening and are on board with this. There was recently, I'm sure some of you may have heard in the news, some penetration testers ended up in jail after breaking to a courthouse because of a botched contract and those sorts of things. But you also don't want them doing things in your environment that you think are not appropriate. So make sure that that's.
Yeah, and what also you know, a lot of folks focus on their headquarters or branch. They're both really important in this, right? And usually folks aren't robbing all, but there's several access points to potentially servers and workstations at your branches, right? So when you're doing these exercises, think about your headquarters and your branches, because there's access points to your network at of these locations. So I would make sure you focus on both those when you do an engagement with a third party.
Definitely.
All right, do we have any other questions from the group before we go ahead and wrap up?
And I'd just like, if you guys do have any follow-up questions, reach out to, your contact at OGO and they can get in touch with us. Or if you know me personally, I'm sure you guys all have my email address. Just reach out to us.
Yep. And feel free to give that out,
Yeah.
Amy.
Yes, I will
Oh, yeah, I
send
should
that
have put
out.
that at the end there.
All right, well, thank you guys very much for joining us for our webinar today and our first inaugural Lattes and Learning series.
Thank you all.